The November rain fell in relentless sheets across Manhattan's steel and glass skyline, turning the streets below into rivers of reflected neon. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse on the 40th floor, Vincent Moretti stood motionless, a crystal glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. At 48 years old, his presence commanded respect without a word spoken. Salt and pepper hair swept back, a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and dark eyes that had witnessed too much to ever fully trust again. But tonight, those eyes weren't focused on the empire he'd built through decades of calculated decisions and ironclad loyalty. Instead, they tracked the restless movements of his German shepherd pacing near the marble-topped bar. "Bruno," Vincent called, his voice carrying the distinctive gravelly tone of someone who'd grown up in the Bronx before money refined his edges. "What's gotten into you, boy?" The dog, a magnificent specimen with an intelligent gaze and perfect posture, barely acknowledged him. Bruno had been Vincent's constant companion for 5 years, a gift from an associate who bred security dogs in upstate New York. The animal had proven himself invaluable, loyal, protective, intuitive in ways that bordered on uncanny. Vincent trusted Bruno more than he trusted most people in his organization, which made the dog's recent behavior all the more troubling. For the past 2 weeks, Bruno had been acting strangely. It started small, whining at windows during their morning routine, refusing his premium-cut steak at dinner, pulling aggressively on the leash during walks through Central Park. Vincent had initially dismissed it as stress or illness, even calling in a veterinarian who'd found nothing physically wrong. "Mr. Moretti," came a voice from behind him. Marcus Webb, his head of security, entered the room with his usual efficiency. The former Marine moved with practiced quietness despite his imposing 6'3" frame. "We need to discuss the situation." Vincent turned from the window, his expression neutral. "What situation, Marcus?" "The dog, sir." Marcus pulled out his phone, swiping through several photos. "For the last week, whenever we take Bruno out, he's been trying to run off. Yesterday afternoon, he actually slipped his collar during the walk with James. Took us 30 minutes to track him down." "Where was he?" "Lower East Side, Orchard Street specifically." Marcus hesitated, then continued. "He was with a kid. A boy, maybe 11 or 12 years old. Homeless from the looks of it. Bruno wouldn't leave the kid's side. We had to practically drag him away." Vincent's jaw tightened imperceptibly. The Lower East Side. That neighborhood had been gentrifying for years, but pockets of it still harbored the forgotten, the people who fell through society's cracks. He knew those streets well. His own grandfather had run operations out of a social club near Delancey Street decades ago. "Show me." Marcus pulled up a grainy photo taken from a distance. The image showed Bruno sitting beside a thin boy with shaggy dark hair, wearing a dirty gray hoodie several sizes too large. The boy's hand rested on Bruno's head, and even through the poor image quality, Vincent could see the dog's complete devotion in his posture. Something cold settled in Vincent's chest. "I want 24-hour surveillance on the dog," Vincent said quietly, "but discreet. I don't want anyone approaching the boy or asking questions. Just watch and report." "Sir, with respect." "That's an order, Marcus." The security chief nodded and left without another word. Vincent returned to the window, but this time his reflection stared back at him, a ghost superimposed over the glittering city. Behind his eyes, memories stirred like sediment in still water, threatening to cloud everything. 8 years. It had been 8 years since the accident. 8 years since Maria. 8 years since? Vincent crushed that thought before it could fully form, downing his whiskey in one burning swallow. Some doors stayed closed for a reason. The following evening arrived wrapped in fog, the kind of thick mist that rolled off the Hudson River and turned the city into something from a noir film. Vincent sat in the back of his black Escalade, parked across from a convenience store on Orchard Street. The windows were tinted so dark that the world outside looked like it existed in perpetual twilight. "He's coming," Tony Ricci murmured from the driver's seat. Tony had been Vincent's right-hand man for 20 years, a stocky man in his mid-50s with a Brooklyn accent you could cut with a knife and loyalty that ran deeper than blood. Vincent leaned forward slightly, his breath fogging the window despite the car's heating. Bruno sat in the back seat beside him, and the dog's entire body had gone rigid with attention, a low whine building in his throat. Then Vincent saw him. The boy emerged from an alley between two buildings, moving with the careful awareness of someone who'd learned that danger could come from any direction. He wore the same oversized hoodie from the photos, paired with jeans that were torn at the knees, though whether by fashion or necessity, Vincent couldn't tell. The kid's sneakers had seen better days, held together with what looked like duct tape. But it was the boy's face that struck Vincent. Even from this distance, even in the fog-diffused streetlight, he could see the sharp intelligence in those eyes. The way the kid scanned his surroundings before entering the convenience store, checking every angle like a soldier in hostile territory. Survival skills. This boy had been on the streets long enough to develop instincts. Bruno's whining intensified, his paws scraping against the leather seat. Vincent placed a firm hand on the dog's back. "Easy, boy. Easy." They waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Vincent found himself studying everything about the scene, the way the bodega's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows, the smell of rain-soaked asphalt mixing with garbage from overflowing bins, the distant wail of sirens heading toward some emergency in another neighborhood. This was the city he'd been born into, the city he'd conquered through force of will and strategic ruthlessness. Yet sitting here now, watching a homeless child through tinted windows, Vincent felt something he rarely experienced. Uncertainty. The boy emerged from the store carrying a plastic bag. But instead of leaving, he sat down on the curb just outside, hunched against the wind. He pulled items from the bag. A bottle of water, what looked like a sandwich wrapped in paper, some chips. Then incredibly, the boy whistled, 2 short notes barely audible over the city's ambient noise. Bruno went insane. The dog barked, clawed at the door, his entire body trembling with desperate energy. Vincent had never seen him react this way to anything or anyone. It was as if every instinct in the animal's body was screaming at him to get to that child. "Boss?" Tony's voice carried a note of concern. Vincent made a decision. "Let him out." "Sir?" "Open the door, Tony. Let's see what happens." Tony complied, and Bruno exploded from the vehicle like a missile. The dog covered the 50 feet between the car and the boy in seconds, and Vincent watched, hand instinctively moving toward the door handle, as the German shepherd nearly bowled the kid over in his enthusiasm. But the boy didn't scream or run. Instead, he laughed. The sound carried across the street, cutting through the fog and the traffic noise. A child's laugh, pure and unguarded despite the circumstances that had brought him here. The boy wrapped his arms around Bruno's neck, and the dog licked his face with joyous abandon, tail wagging so hard his entire back end moved with it. Vincent found himself stepping out of the car before he'd consciously decided to do so. Tony started to follow, but Vincent raised a hand, stopping him. This felt like something he needed to witness alone. He crossed the street, his expensive Italian shoes splashing through puddles, his long coat billowing slightly in the wind. As he approached, the boy looked up, his expression shifting from happiness to wariness in an instant. But he didn't run. His hand remained on Bruno's collar as if the dog's presence gave him courage. "That's my dog," Vincent said, keeping his voice neutral, non-threatening. Up close, he could see details the photos had missed. The boy's olive complexion, the shadows under his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights, the way he held himself with a strange dignity despite his situation. "Sorry, mister," the boy said, his voice carrying a slight rasp as if he wasn't used to talking much. "He just came running over. I wasn't trying to steal him or nothing." "I can see that." Vincent studied the way Bruno pressed against the boy's side, completely relaxed in a way the dog rarely was even at home. "He seems to like you." The boy shrugged, but Vincent caught the smallest smile tugging at his lips. "Dogs usually do. I'm good with animals. What's your name?" A pause. The boy's eyes flicked past Vincent to the expensive SUV idling across the street, calculating. "Danny." "I'm Vincent." He didn't offer his last name. "You live around here, Danny?" "Sometimes." The guarded look intensified. Look, I didn't do nothing wrong. I'm just sitting here. That's not illegal. No, it's not. Vincent crouched down, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. This close, he could see more, the intelligence burning behind the wariness, the way Danny's fingers unconsciously scratched behind Bruno's ears in exactly the spots the dog loved most. And then Vincent saw it. When Danny turned his head slightly, gesturing toward where Bruno had come from, the streetlight caught his neck just right. There, just below and behind his left ear, was a birthmark. Not large, perhaps the size of a quarter, shaped vaguely like a crescent moon. Vincent's world tilted, his vision tunneled, his chest constricted. The sounds of the city faded to a distant roar, replaced by the thundering of his own heartbeat, because he knew that birthmark. He'd kissed it goodnight 1,000 times. He'd traced it with his finger while telling bedtime stories. Mister, you okay? Danny's voice pulled him back to the present. The boy was looking at him with concern, one hand still on Bruno, the other half raised as if ready to call for help. Vincent forced himself to breathe, to maintain his composure even as everything inside him fractured. I'm fine, he managed, his voice rougher than usual. Just tired. Long day. He stood abruptly, his mind racing. It couldn't be. The odds were impossible. 8 years. 8 years of searching, of dead ends, of eventually accepting the unacceptable. And now this boy with Bruno acting like he'd found his long-lost family, with that specific distinctive mark. Bruno, come, Vincent commanded, his voice brooking no argument. The dog whined, looking between Vincent and Danny, clearly torn. But years of training won out, and Bruno reluctantly moved toward his owner, though he kept looking back at the boy. Can I? Danny spoke up hesitantly. Can I see him again sometime? Your dog, I mean. He's real nice. Vincent looked at the boy, at Danny, and felt something inside his carefully constructed armor crack. Maybe, he said softly. Maybe you will. He turned and walked back to the car, Bruno at his heel but glancing back every few steps. Vincent climbed into the back seat, closed the door and sat in silence while Tony pulled away from the curb. Boss, Tony ventured after a minute. You look like you've seen a ghost. Vincent didn't answer. He couldn't, because he was staring at his hands, and they were trembling. Something that hadn't happened in 20 years, not since the night of the accident, not since the night he'd lost everything. The birthmark, the way Bruno had reacted. The boy's age, his features, even the way he'd touched his ear when nervous. A habit Vincent remembered so clearly it hurt. It was impossible. But what if it wasn't? Tony, Vincent said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I need you to find out everything about that boy. Everything. Who he is, where he came from, how long he's been on the streets. But carefully. I don't want him spooked, and I don't want anyone else asking questions. Just you. People we can absolutely trust. Understood? Tony met Vincent's eyes in the rearview mirror, and something in his boss's expression must have communicated the gravity of the situation. Understood. I'll start tonight. Vincent nodded and turned to look out the window as the city slid past in a blur of lights and shadows. Beside him, Bruno rested his head on Vincent's leg, and for the first time in 8 years, Vincent Moretti allowed himself to feel something he'd buried so deep he'd thought it was dead. Hope. And it terrified him. Vincent Moretti hadn't slept in 3 days. The penthouse, usually a sanctuary of controlled silence and expensive minimalism, had become a prison of his own making. He'd spent the past 72 hours pacing the marble floors, staring at photographs spread across his mahogany desk, and replaying that moment on Orchard Street over and over in his mind, until it felt like a dream he couldn't wake from. The birthmark. That damned birthmark. Dawn broke over Manhattan, painting the skyline in shades of amber and rose gold. Vincent stood at his window nursing his 4th espresso of the morning, watching the city wake up. Somewhere out there, 15 blocks south, a boy named Danny was probably stirring in whatever shelter he'd found for the night. The thought made Vincent's chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name, something between rage and grief, between hope and terror. Boss, I've got the preliminary report. Tony's voice cut through the silence. The older man entered the study carrying a leather portfolio, his expression grave. He'd aged noticeably over the past few years, more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes, but his loyalty remained diamond hard. Vincent turned from the window. "Tell me." Tony opened the portfolio, pulling out several photographs and documents. "The boy's name is Danny. No last name that anyone knows. He's been on the streets for at least 5 years, maybe longer. Most of the shopkeepers in the Lower East Side know him. Says he's polite, doesn't cause trouble, sometimes does odd jobs for food. 5 years." Vincent's voice was barely above a whisper. "He'd have been 6 or 7. "Yeah." Tony laid out surveillance photos taken over the past 2 days. They showed Danny in various locations, sitting outside a laundromat, digging through a dumpster behind a restaurant, huddled in a doorway during yesterday's rain. Each image felt like a knife between Vincent's ribs. He's not alone, though. There's an older man he stays with sometimes. Street people call him Frank. Former veteran, from what we've gathered. Looks like he's been watching out for the kid. Vincent picked up one of the photos. It showed Danny and an elderly man with a wild gray beard sharing a sandwich on a bench. The old man's hand rested protectively on Danny's shoulder, and something about the gesture made Vincent's throat constrict. "Where do they stay?" "Abandoned building on Rivington Street. Used to be a textile factory back in the 70s. City's been meaning to tear it down for years, but you know how that goes. Paperwork, funding. Nobody cares about these neighborhoods until some developer wants to build luxury condos." Tony paused, watching his boss carefully. "Vincent, what's this really about? I've known you 20 years. I've never seen you like this over some street kid." Vincent was silent for a long moment, his fingers tracing the edge of the photograph. Finally he spoke, his voice rough with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. "The birthmark, Tony. Did you see it in any of the photos?" Tony shuffled through the images until he found one, a clearer shot taken with a telephoto lens. Danny's head was turned, and there, visible on his neck, was the distinctive crescent-shaped mark. "Yeah, I see it. So what?" Leonardo had the same mark. Exact same placement, same shape. Vincent's hands trembled slightly as he set down his espresso cup. Maria used to joke that it looked like the moon was watching over him while he slept. The color drained from Tony's face. "Boss, Leonardo's been gone for 8 years. You searched for 2 years straight. We all did. The investigators, the private detectives, even contacts in law enforcement. Everyone said he was gone. Dead, most likely." Vincent's voice hardened. "But they never found a body, Tony. Never found any evidence of what happened that night except blood in the car and Maria's body." He had to force the words out. "What if they were wrong? What if someone took him? What if my son has been living on the streets of my own city while I was 15 blocks north in a penthouse?" Tony sat down heavily in one of the leather chairs, running his hand over his face. "Jesus, Vincent. Even if it's true, and that's a big if, how would that even be possible? Who would take a 4-year-old and then just dump him on the streets? Someone who wanted to hurt me, but didn't want the attention that would come from ending a child's life." Vincent's mind was already working through possibilities, old enemies, old wars. The Castellanos were making their move that year, trying to push into our territory. Remember? We were in the middle of negotiations that could have gone either way, peace or bloodshed. You think Marco Castellano orchestrated the accident? I think it's possible. Vincent picked up another photo, this one of Danny crouched beside a bodega cat, his young face split in a rare smile. "The accident was meant for me, Tony. Maria was driving my car that night because hers was in the shop. Leo was supposed to be with the nanny, but Maria decided to bring him to her sister's house instead. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong car. But the police investigated a car accident. They weren't looking for conspiracy or kidnapping because we had no reason to suspect it was anything but tragedy." Vincent's voice grew cold, the tone he used when making decisions that would alter lives. "But if someone took my son that night, thinking they'd use him as leverage or ransom and then realized the heat was too intense, that every law enforcement agency in New York was looking, Maybe they panicked. Maybe they dumped him somewhere, figuring a 4-year-old couldn't identify them. Tony was quiet, absorbing the implications. A 4-year-old with head trauma from the accident, probably terrified, possibly with memory loss, would explain why he never found his way home. Why he never told anyone who he was. Vincent's voice cracked slightly. He might not even remember Tony. He might not remember us at all. The two men sat in silence as the morning sun climbed higher, filling the study with golden light that felt obscene in its beauty. How could the world be so bright when these possibilities existed in the shadows? "What do you want me to do?" Tony finally asked. "I need proof. Real proof, not just hope and coincidence." Vincent's business mind reasserted itself, pushing emotion aside in favor of strategy. "I need medical records from the hospital the night of the accident. I need DNA, something of Leo's from before, clothing, a toothbrush, anything we might have saved. And I need a sample from Danny, but it has to be done carefully. He can't know what we're doing. That's not going to be easy. The kid's smart from what I've seen, street smart. He'll notice if we're watching too close. Then we don't watch him, we help him." Vincent stood, moving to the window again. "Marcus mentioned there are gang members who operate in that area, young guys who prey on the homeless population. I want 24-hour protection on Danny and the old man. Frank, you said his name was, but invisible protection. Our people stay back, intervene only if there's real danger. And when you have proof? If the DNA matches?" Vincent didn't answer immediately. He was watching a helicopter trace its path across the skyline, thinking about all the decisions that had led him to this moment. The choices he'd made, the life he'd built, the empire constructed on foundations that most people would find morally bankrupt. "If it's him," Vincent said quietly, "everything changes." By late afternoon, Vincent found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, walking the streets of the Lower East Side without security, without the armor of his reputation. He'd dressed down, jeans, a simple black jacket, a baseball cap pulled low. Tony had argued against it, but Vincent needed to see Danny's world with his own eyes, needed to understand where his possible son had been surviving. The neighborhood was a study in contrasts. Trendy coffee shops sat next to aging tenements. Street art covered brick walls beside fading advertisements from decades past. Young professionals in designer athleisure stepped around homeless individuals wrapped in donated blankets. The gentrification wave was visible in every block, progress for some, displacement for others. Vincent walked past the convenience store where he'd first approached Danny. The same bored clerk sat behind bulletproof glass, scrolling through his phone. A few blocks south, he found the abandoned textile factory Tony had mentioned. The building was a corpse of industrial history, windows broken or boarded up, walls covered in graffiti ranging from artistic murals to crude tags. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, but sections had been cut away, creating passages for those who knew where to look. Vincent stood across the street studying the structure. Somewhere inside, Danny and Frank had created a life. The thought was unbearable. His son, if it truly was his son, sleeping in a condemned building while Vincent lived in luxury 15 blocks away. "You looking to score or looking to crash?" The voice startled him. Vincent turned to find a young woman, maybe 25, with purple streaks in her dark hair and eyes that had seen too much too soon. She held a cigarette in one hand and regarded him with the wary assessment of someone used to judging threats. "Neither," Vincent said carefully. "Just passing through." "Right." She didn't sound convinced. "Word of advice. Don't go poking around that building unless you know the people inside. Frank doesn't like strangers, and some of the others in there are unpredictable." "Frank?" The older gentleman. "Yeah. He's good people, looks out for the kids who end up down here." She took a drag of her cigarette. "You a social worker or something? Because they send people around sometimes trying to help. But most of us know how that ends. System's broken." Vincent studied her, seeing intelligence beneath the street-hardened exterior. "I'm not a social worker. I'm just someone who's concerned about a boy I met. His name's Danny." Her expression shifted slightly. Not quite a smile, but a softening around the eyes. "Danny's a good kid. Quiet, keeps to himself mostly. He's got a better shot than most of us, though. He's still young enough that someone might actually give him a chance. What do you mean? I mean, once you hit 15, 16, society's basically given up on you. But a kid like Danny, smart, polite, hasn't been completely beaten down by this life yet. If he could just get off the streets, maybe get into a decent foster situation. She shrugged. Of course, that's a big if. System's overwhelmed. Most kids just fall through the cracks. Vincent felt anger rising in his chest. Not at this young woman, but at a system that could allow children to live like this in one of the richest cities in the world. How long has Danny been around? Few years, at least. He showed up when he was real little. Frank found him wandering around, wouldn't talk for months, trauma probably. Frank's been taking care of him since, best he can. She dropped her cigarette, grinding it under her worn sneaker. Look, I don't know what your deal is, but if you're actually trying to help Danny, just be careful. He doesn't trust easy. None of us do. We've learned that most people who say they want to help are really just trying to make themselves feel better. I understand, Vincent said, and he meant it. The young woman walked away, disappearing around a corner. Vincent remained where he was, watching the building as afternoon faded toward evening. Lights began to appear in some of the windows, candles or battery-powered lamps, evidence of life persisting in spaces meant to be empty. Then he saw them. Danny emerged from one of the cut sections in the fence, followed by Frank. The old man moved slowly, leaning heavily on a makeshift cane while Danny carried 2 plastic bags that appeared to be full of canned goods. They must have hit a food pantry or church distribution. Vincent watched as Danny adjusted his pace to match Frank's, the boy's small hand occasionally steadying the old man's elbow when the ground was uneven. There was a carefulness to the way Danny moved, a hyper-awareness that made Vincent's heart ache. No child should have to navigate the world like this. They disappeared back into the building, and Vincent finally turned away, pulling out his phone. "Tony," he said when his right-hand man answered, "I need you to find out everything about Frank. Full name, military history, how he ended up on the streets, and contact Dr. Sarah Chen. Tell her I need a discrete DNA analysis done. Personal favor, complete confidentiality. You got something from the boy?" "Not yet, but I will." Vincent started walking back toward where his driver waited several blocks away. "And Tony? Start looking into the Castellano organization, who was in their inner circle 8 years ago. If someone orchestrated that accident and took Leo, I need to know who. And I need to know if they're still breathing." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Boss, if this turns out to be what you think it is, what are you going to do?" Vincent stopped walking. Around him, the city continued its endless motion, cars honking, people rushing to somewhere important, the urban symphony that never truly silenced. He thought about the boy carrying groceries for an old man, about Bruno's desperate need to reach him, about a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon. "I'm going to get my son back," Vincent said simply. "And then I'm going to make sure that whoever took him from me understands exactly what that cost." He ended the call and continued walking, his mind already working through scenarios and strategies. But underneath the calculating, underneath the anger and the need for answers, something else stirred, something he hadn't felt in 8 long years. A father's love, dormant but never dead, beginning to wake. That night, Vincent sat in his study with a box he hadn't opened in years. Inside were the remnants of a life interrupted, a small blue blanket, a stuffed elephant named Peanut, photographs of birthday parties and beach trips, a plastic cup with a cartoon character faded by time and use. At the bottom of the box, sealed in a plastic bag, was a child's toothbrush. Vincent held it up to the light, his hand steady now despite the storm of emotions inside. This small object might hold the answers he desperately needed. Tomorrow, Dr. Chen would begin the analysis. Tomorrow, he would start the process of either confirming his impossible hope or destroying it entirely. Bruno padded into the room, nails clicking on the hardwood floor. The dog had been restless since their encounter with Danny, spending hours lying by the door as if waiting for someone who never came. "You know, don't you, boy?" Vincent murmured, reaching down to scratch behind the dog's ears. "You knew before I did." Bruno whined softly, resting his massive head on Vincent's knee. They sat together in the silence, man and dog, both waiting for answers that might change everything. Outside, the city glittered with a million lights, each one representing a life, a story, a struggle. And somewhere in those streets, a boy named Danny was falling asleep, unaware that the trajectory of his life might be about to shift in ways he couldn't imagine. Vincent closed the box carefully, reverently, and made a silent promise to the child he'd lost and the child he might have found. This time, nothing would take his son away. Nothing. 3 weeks had passed since Dr. Sarah Chen had confirmed what Vincent's heart already knew. The DNA was a match. Leonardo Vincent Moretti, declared missing 8 years ago, was alive. He was living in an abandoned factory, going by the name Danny, with no memory of the life he'd once had. Vincent kept the report in his desk drawer, taking it out sometimes in the dead of night to stare at the clinical language that confirmed a miracle. But knowing the truth and acting on it were two different things. Every instinct screamed at him to claim his son immediately, to bring him home, to make up for 8 lost years. But Tony's words echoed constantly in his mind. The kid doesn't trust easy. You move too fast, you'll lose him forever. So Vincent had constructed a careful plan, one that required patience he didn't know he possessed. It started at the soup kitchen on Houston Street. The facility was run by a priest named Father Michael, an old friend who'd known Vincent since childhood, back when they were both just kids from the Bronx trying to figure out their place in the world. They'd taken very different paths, but mutual respect remained. Vincent had made a substantial anonymous donation to the kitchen, with one request, that he be allowed to volunteer during evening meal service. Father Michael had asked no questions, understanding that some acts of charity came from complicated places. Now, on a cold December evening, Vincent stood behind a serving counter wearing a simple apron, ladling soup into bowls for the line of people stretching out the door. His hands, more accustomed to signing business contracts than serving food, moved with practiced efficiency he'd developed over the past week of volunteering. And then Danny walked through the door. The boy was bundled in the same oversized hoodie with Frank shuffling beside him. Danny's eyes scanned the room with that same hypervigilance Vincent had observed before, cataloging exits and potential threats. When his gaze landed on Vincent, recognition flickered across his face, followed by wariness. Vincent kept his expression neutral, continuing to serve the elderly woman in front of him. But his heart hammered against his ribs, and he had to consciously steady his breathing. Danny and Frank joined the line. Vincent could track their progress through the queue without looking directly at them, a skill he'd honed in his previous life, when being aware of his surroundings meant survival. Finally, they stood before him. "Evening," Vincent said casually, meeting Danny's eyes. "Good to see you again." Danny's surprise was evident. "You're the guy with the dog. Bruno, right?" "That's right." Vincent filled a bowl with the chicken soup, making sure to add extra vegetables. "Didn't expect to see you here." "Could say the same thing about you," Danny replied, a hint of suspicion in his voice. "You don't look like the volunteering type." Frank chuckled beside him, a raspy sound that turned into a cough. The old man's skin had an unhealthy pallor, and his hands trembled slightly as he held out his bowl. "Easy, Danny. Man's doing a good thing here." Vincent served Frank, noting the veteran's worn army jacket and the purple heart pin barely visible beneath the grime. "Thank you for your service," he said quietly. Frank's eyes, surprisingly sharp despite his condition, studied Vincent carefully. "You serve?" "No, sir. But my uncle did." "Vietnam." Something shifted in Frank's expression. A softening, a recognition of shared understanding. "Good war, bad time." He moved on, Danny following, but the boy glanced back once before finding a seat at a corner table. Vincent continued serving for another hour, hyper-aware of Danny's presence in the room. He watched as the boy ate slowly, making his food last, occasionally slipping a roll into his pocket for later. He watched as Danny helped Frank to the bathroom when the old man struggled to stand. He watched as his son, navigated a world that no child should have to know. When the meal service ended and Vincent was cleaning up, Father Michael approached. "The boy you've been watching," the priest said quietly. "Danny." He's been coming here for years. What can you tell me about him? Not much. He's quiet, polite, never causes trouble. Frank looks after him, saved his life, from what I understand. Father Michael wiped down a table. Vincent, whatever you're doing, be careful. These kids have been hurt in ways that don't always show. Trust is earned slowly out here. I know. Vincent disposed of his apron. I just want to help. Then help. But remember, sometimes the kindest thing we can do is let people keep their dignity while we're helping them. Vincent nodded, filing away the wisdom. As he prepared to leave, he noticed Danny and Frank gathering their things. On impulse, he approached their table. "Getting cold out there," Vincent said. "You gentlemen need a ride somewhere?" Danny's guard went up immediately. "We're fine." "Danny," Frank said tiredly, "it's going to snow tonight. My legs aren't what they used to be." The boy's expression softened, concern evident. He looked at Vincent, then at Frank, clearly torn between protecting the old man and maintaining his wariness of strangers. "Just to wherever you're staying," Vincent offered. "My car's heated and it's no trouble." After a long moment, Danny nodded. "Okay, but just to Rivington Street, we can walk from there." 20 minutes later, Vincent's driver pulled up to the corner Danny had indicated. The boy had been silent during the ride, but Frank had talked. Stories about his time in the army. Observations about the city changing. Nothing too personal, but enough to build rapport. As they prepared to exit, Vincent made his move. "Listen, I've been thinking. I could use some help at my place a few times a week. Light work, walking Bruno, some organizing. I'd pay fair and there's always food." He looked at Danny directly. "You interested?" Danny's eyes narrowed. "Why me?" "Because Bruno likes you," Vincent said honestly. "And because you seem like a kid who could use a break. No strings, no obligations, just work for pay." The boy looked at Frank, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Danny spoke. "How much?" $20 an hour, 3 hours, twice a week to start. It was far more than any legitimate odd job would pay, and Danny knew it. "That's too much. That's what I'm offering." Vincent pulled out a business card with only a phone number on it. "Think about it. Call if you're interested." Danny took the card, studying it suspiciously before pocketing it. "Maybe." They got out of the car, and Vincent watched them disappear into the winter night. Tony, who'd been driving, met Vincent's eyes in the rearview mirror. "You're playing a dangerous game, boss." "I know." Vincent stared out at the empty street. "But what choice do I have?" Danny called 3 days later. The next week fell into a routine that felt surreal. Twice weekly, Danny would arrive at Vincent's building, always punctual, always guarded. Marcus would escort him up to the penthouse, where Bruno would lose his mind with joy, and Danny would allow himself a small smile. The work Vincent assigned was simple: walking Bruno, organizing books, helping sort through old files. But mostly they talked. Or rather, Vincent asked questions, and Danny slowly, cautiously, began to answer. "How long have you been with Frank?" Vincent asked one afternoon while they walked Bruno through Central Park. "Long time. 5, maybe 6 years." Danny threw a tennis ball, watching Bruno race after it. "He found me when I was little. I don't remember much before that." "You don't remember your family, where you lived?" Danny's expression closed off slightly. "No. Frank says I had a head injury when he found me. Doctors at the free clinic said sometimes trauma does that. Makes you forget things." Vincent's chest tightened. "Where did Frank find you?" "Near a hospital," he said. "I was just wandering around, couldn't talk, couldn't tell anyone who I was." Danny's voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing someone else's life. "Frank took me in, made sure I had food and a safe place to sleep. He's a good man." "He is," Vincent agreed. "Does he know anything about where you came from?" "If he does, he never told me." Danny caught the ball Bruno brought back, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes I get these, not memories exactly, more like feelings. Like I remember being somewhere warm, and there was music and someone singing." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the vulnerability. "But it's probably just my imagination." Vincent had to turn away, pretending to watch a jogger pass by because his eyes were burning and his throat had closed up. Maria used to sing to Leo every night, Italian lullabies her grandmother had taught her. That doesn't sound like imagination, Vincent managed. That sounds like a memory trying to surface. Over the following weeks, Vincent learned pieces of his son's life in fragments. He learned that Danny had taught himself to read using newspapers and discarded books. He learned that the boy had a talent for drawing, creating detailed sketches on any available surface. He learned that Danny had nightmares sometimes, waking up with his heart racing and images of broken glass and screaming metal that he couldn't explain. Each revelation was another knife wound, another reminder of what had been stolen from both of them. But Vincent also witnessed Danny slowly beginning to trust. The boy started arriving early sometimes, helping Vincent make coffee. He'd linger after his work was done, playing with Bruno or just sitting quietly in the study while Vincent worked. Once, Vincent found him asleep on the couch, exhausted from a particularly cold night on the streets, and had covered him with a blanket rather than wake him. The moment of truth came on a frigid January evening. Danny had been coming to the penthouse for 6 weeks. Frank's health had deteriorated, a chest infection that wouldn't clear up despite the antibiotics Vincent had discreetly provided through Dr. Chen. Danny was worried, the anxiety evident in every tense line of his small body. They sat in Vincent's study, Bruno lying across both their feet when Vincent made a decision. He pulled out an old photo album from his desk drawer. "Danny, I want to show you something." The boy looked up from the homework Vincent had started helping him with, basic math and reading comprehension, preparing him for the possibility of eventually returning to school. Vincent opened the album to a specific page. It showed a family, a beautiful woman with dark hair and warm eyes, a man in his late 30s who looked like a younger version of Vincent, and a small boy, maybe 4 years old, with a bright smile and mischievous eyes. Danny stared at the photo, and something strange happened to his expression. His breath caught. His hand moved unconsciously to touch the birthmark on his neck. "Who are they?" he whispered. "That's my family," Vincent said carefully. "My wife Maria, and my son Leonardo. We called him Leo. Where are they now?" "Maria died 8 years ago. Car accident." Vincent's voice was steady despite the emotion churning inside him. "And Leo? Leo disappeared that same night. I've been looking for him ever since." Danny's eyes were locked on the photograph, specifically on the small boy. "He looks, I don't know, familiar maybe?" Vincent reached over and gently turned Danny's head, exposing the birthmark. Then he pointed to the photo where young Leo's neck was visible, showing the exact same crescent-shaped mark. The silence that followed was deafening. Danny pulled away, standing abruptly, his eyes wide with a mix of fear, confusion, and something else. Recognition that his conscious mind couldn't quite process, but his heart understood. "No," Danny said, shaking his head. "No, that's impossible." "I had a DNA test done," Vincent said quietly. "Weeks ago, from a cup you used here. I'm sorry for the deception, but I needed to be sure. Danny, your real name is Leonardo. You're my son." The boy backed away until he hit the wall, his breathing rapid, his eyes darting around as if looking for escape. "You're lying. This is some kind of trick. Frank said there are people who... Frank found you near Mount Sinai Hospital on the night of October 15th, 8 years ago," Vincent interrupted gently. "You had a head wound, you were in shock, and you couldn't speak. That was the same night my wife died and my son disappeared. The police report documented everything. I can show you." Danny slid down the wall until he was sitting, his arms wrapped around his knees. I don't remember any of this." Vincent moved slowly, carefully, sitting down on the floor across from him, the powerful businessman meeting his traumatized son at his level. "I know you don't, and I'm not asking you to remember. I'm just telling you the truth." "Why now? Why wait all this time to tell me?" "Because I needed you to trust me first. Because I needed you to know that I care about you, about Danny, not just about getting my son back." Vincent's voice cracked slightly. "You've survived 8 years on your own. You're strong, you're smart, you're everything I could have hoped you'd become. I just want the chance to be your father again. Danny looked up, tears streaming down his face. The first time Vincent had seen him cry. What if I can't be him? What if I can't be Leonardo? Then you don't have to be, Vincent said firmly. You can be Danny. You can be whoever you want to be. I just want you to be safe and warm and to never have to wonder where your next meal is coming from. They sat in silence, the weight of revelation settling between them. Bruno, sensing the emotional turmoil, moved to Danny and rested his head in the boy's lap, offering the simple comfort that only animals could provide. Finally, Danny spoke, his voice small. Can I still see Frank? Even if what you're saying is true? Of course, Frank saved your life. He's family too. Danny nodded slowly, processing. This is crazy. I know. I mean really crazy. I know. But it kind of explains why your dog was so obsessed with me. Despite everything, Vincent felt a laugh escape. Yeah, Bruno knew before any of us. Danny wiped his eyes, looking at Vincent with a mix of fear and hope. What happens now? Now, Vincent said carefully, we take it one day at a time. No pressure, no expectations, just let me take care of you. Let me be the father I should have been all along. The boy nodded, exhausted by emotion, and Vincent saw his son, truly saw Leonardo beneath the survival instincts and street wisdom, for the first time in 8 years. The first morning Danny woke up in Vincent's penthouse, he didn't know where he was. Panic seized him instantly. The softness beneath him was wrong, the warmth surrounding him was unfamiliar, the silence was too complete. His eyes flew open, and for a terrifying moment, he thought he'd been taken, trapped, caught in some nightmare scenario Frank had always warned him about. Then Bruno's wet nose pressed against his hand and memory flooded back. The DNA test, the photographs, the impossible truth that Vincent claimed was real. Danny sat up slowly in the guest bedroom Vincent had prepared for him. Morning light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, revealing a space larger than anywhere Danny and Frank had ever stayed. The bed was massive, covered in blankets softer than anything Danny had felt in years. There was a desk, a bookshelf, and a closet that Vincent had said they'd fill together when Danny was ready. A soft knock on the door made him tense. Danny, you awake? Vincent's voice was gentle, careful not to push. Yeah, Danny called back, his voice rough with sleep. Vincent entered carrying a tray with breakfast. Eggs, toast, orange juice, fresh fruit. He set it on the desk and sat in the chair nearby, maintaining distance. Thought you might be hungry. No pressure to eat here if you'd rather go to the kitchen. Danny stared at the food, his stomach growling despite his emotional confusion. This is a lot. You don't have to finish it all. Vincent watched as Danny cautiously approached, picking up the toast first. How'd you sleep? Okay, I guess. Danny took a bite, then another, hunger overriding hesitation. The bed's really soft. Too soft? We can get something firmer if... No, it's fine. Danny sat on the edge of the bed, plate in his lap. It's just different. They fell into silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Vincent had learned over the past weeks that Danny needed space to process, that pushing too hard would only make him retreat further into himself. I want to see Frank today, Danny said finally. Make sure he's okay. Of course. Dr. Chen's been treating him at the clinic. We can visit this morning if you'd like. Vincent hesitated, then added, I've also been looking into housing options for Frank. Nothing's decided yet, but there are some assisted living facilities for veterans that... You'd do that? Danny looked up, surprise evident in his eyes. Frank saved your life. He took care of you when I couldn't. That makes him family, and I take care of family. Vincent's voice was firm. Besides, he deserves better than sleeping in an abandoned building. His service to this country earned him that much at least. Something in Danny's expression shifted, a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. Okay, he said quietly. Thanks. The transition wasn't easy. Over the following weeks, Danny struggled with the whiplash between his old life and his new reality. Some days he'd wake up forgetting where he was. Others he'd refuse to leave the penthouse, overwhelmed by the luxury surrounding him. He had nightmares frequently, Fragmented images of twisted metal, broken glass, a woman's scream that made him wake up sobbing. Vincent was there for each crisis, never judging, never pushing. He'd sit on the floor outside Danny's room during bad nights, close enough that the boy knew he wasn't alone but respecting his need for space. He enrolled Danny in therapy with Dr. Maria Rodriguez, a specialist in childhood trauma who worked with patience and compassion. But the biggest challenge came from an unexpected source. Marco Castellano had heard rumors. Word on the street was that Vincent Moretti had taken in a boy, that he'd been seen visiting the Lower East Side repeatedly, that something had changed in the normally controlled businessman. The threat came in the form of a message delivered to Tony. Heard you found something precious. Would be a shame if history repeated itself. Vincent's response was immediate and cold. He called a meeting with the Castellano family at a neutral location, a restaurant in Little Italy that had hosted such conversations for generations. Vincent arrived with Tony and Marcus, while Marco brought his own men. You have something to say to me. Say it now, Vincent said, his voice carrying the weight of decades in this life. Marco, a heavy-set man in his 60s with calculating eyes, smiled without warmth. Just curious about your new house guest. People are talking. Let them talk. Vincent leaned forward. But understand this clearly. If anything happens to that boy, if anyone even looks at him wrong, there won't be negotiations or truces. I will dismantle everything you've built piece by piece. Strong words for one child. He's my son. Vincent's voice was absolute zero. My son who was taken from me 8 years ago. The son who I've finally gotten back. And I will burn this entire city down before I let anyone threaten him again. The room went silent. Marco's expression shifted as he processed the implications. Your son? The one from the accident? Yes. Vincent, I swear on my mother's grave we had nothing to do with that. The accident, the boy disappearing, that wasn't us. Marco's usual bravado had evaporated. There are lines even we don't cross. Vincent studied him, his instincts honed by years of reading people. Marco was telling the truth. Then who? I don't know. But I'll help you find out, if only to prove it wasn't my family. Marco extended his hand. And the boy will be under our protection too. Anyone comes after him, they answer to both our organizations. It wasn't forgiveness, and it didn't erase years of conflict. But it was a truce built on something both men understood. Family. 3 months after the revelation, Frank moved into a veterans' residence in Queens. The facility was clean, warm, with medical staff and communal areas where former soldiers gathered to share stories. Vincent had arranged everything, including a private room and full medical coverage. Danny visited twice a week, sometimes with Vincent, sometimes alone when he needed the connection to his past life. Frank's health improved with proper care, and though his memory was fading in some ways, his love for Danny remained sharp. You did good, kid, Frank told Danny one afternoon as they sat in the facility's garden. You survived. That's what matters. I miss it sometimes, Danny admitted. Not the cold or the hunger, but I don't know. Things were simpler. Simpler isn't always better. Frank's weathered hand covered Danny's. Vincent's a good man. He's giving you chances I never could. Don't waste them because change is scary. But what if I can't be what he needs? What if I can't be Leonardo? Then be Danny. Be whoever you need to be. Frank smiled. That man in there doesn't need Leonardo back. He just needs his son safe and happy. The rest is details. 6 months after moving in, Danny started school. It was terrifying. Being around other kids, navigating social dynamics he'd never learned, trying to catch up academically. But Vincent hired tutors, and Dr. Rodriguez helped him develop coping strategies. And slowly Danny began to find his footing. He made a friend, a boy named Marcus Jr., the son of Vincent's head of security. Marcus Jr. didn't know Danny's full story, just that he'd had a tough time before coming to live with Vincent. That simple acceptance meant everything. Danny also discovered he had a talent for art. His teacher entered one of his drawings in a school competition, a piece showing a dog bringing together 2 figures separated by darkness. It won first place. And when Danny saw Vincent's tears at the award ceremony, something inside him finally began to heal. That night, as they walked Bruno through Central Park under spring stars, Danny spoke the words that had been building for months. "Dad?" Vincent stopped walking. It was the first time Danny had called him that. "Yes? Thank you, for not giving up, for finding me." Vincent's voice was thick with emotion. "You have nothing to thank me for. You're my son. I'll never stop fighting for you." Danny moved closer and Vincent wrapped his arm around the boy's shoulders. Bruno walked beside them, tail wagging, as if he'd known all along how this story would end. They walked in comfortable silence, three beings connected by loss and love and the miracle of second chances. Vincent had spent years building an empire on foundations of power and control. But standing in Central Park with his son, his found, surviving, miraculous son, he understood that everything he'd accomplished meant nothing compared to this moment. "I love you, Leo," Vincent said softly, using his son's birth name for the first time since the revelation. Danny looked up, his eyes reflecting the city lights. "I love you too, Dad. Even though I don't remember everything yet, I know it's true. Memory or no memory, you're my son. Nothing changes that." They continued walking, leaving the shadows of the past behind, stepping together into a future neither had thought possible. Bruno led the way, the loyal companion who'd known the truth before anyone else, the bridge that had brought them back together. The city stretched out around them, full of possibility and promise, and for the first time in 8 years, Vincent Moretti felt complete. His son was home. His family, however unconventional, was whole. And that was everything.